My daughter's attorney looked at me across that conference table and said, "Mr. Brooks, with respect, you have no legal standing in this matter." He said it the way attorneys say things they have practiced, calmly, precisely, with the particular confidence of a man who has been told, thoroughly and in advance, that the other side has nothing. His name was Richard Calloway, and he was 53 years old, and he had been doing real estate litigation in Portland for 22 years, and he had the manner of a man who wins most of his cases because he prepares better than the people across the table from him. He was not wrong about most things. He was wrong about this. I looked at him. I looked at my daughter, Heidi, who was seated to his left and who had not looked at me since I walked into the room. She had been looking at the surface of the conference table with the expression of someone who has convinced herself that what is about to happen is necessary and has rehearsed that conviction enough times that she can sit through it, without flinching. Then I looked at my attorney, Justin Mercer, who was seated to my right and who had said nothing since we sat down. Justin was not a man who talked before he needed to. He was 44 years old, and he had spent 15 years doing exactly this kind of work. And he had a quality I had come to value greatly in the weeks since this began, which was that he was never surprised by anything. Not by Calloway's manner, not by the documents he had found, not by the particular combination of love and betrayal that had brought all of us into this room on a Wednesday morning in Portland. He was not surprised now. He reached into his briefcase without hurrying. He placed a folder on the table between us. He opened it with the deliberate care of someone who understands that the way you handle a document tells the other side something about what the document contains. He slid the first page across to Richard Calloway without saying a word. Richard picked it up. He read the first page, then the second. It takes a moment for a very good attorney to recalibrate when the ground shifts beneath a position they believed was solid. But it shifts, and when it does, you can see it in the eyes before the face has time to catch up. The folder contained 5 documents. What happened in the 4 minutes after Justin slid that first page across the table changed everything in that room and, in the ways that matter most, everything that came after. This is the story of what happens when a daughter forgets that her father spent 30 years reading architectural drawings, which is to say, documents that reward the people who read them carefully and punish the people who assume they already know what they say. My name is Brian Brooks. I am 68 years old. I was born in Eugene, Oregon, the second son of a high school drafting teacher who believed with the particular conviction of a man who had built his entire professional life around a single skill, that the ability to read a technical drawing was among the most undervalued capabilities a person could develop. He spent 30 years in a classroom trying to transfer that belief to teenagers who were mostly interested in being somewhere else. And he did it with the patience of someone who understood that most worthwhile things take longer than you expect and produce results you cannot always see in the moment. I studied architecture at the University of Oregon, spent 3 years at a commercial firm in Seattle, and returned to Portland in 1984 to found Brooks Architecture. Over 30 years, I designed 41 commercial projects in the metro area, including 3 that received state historic preservation recognition. I am not a famous architect. I am a good one. There is a meaningful difference between those two things. I sold the firm 8 years ago to 2 senior associates who had earned the right to run it. The proceeds, combined with rental income from retained properties, gave me a retirement that was comfortable without being extravagant. My wife Dorothy passed 6 years ago, Parkinson's disease, taking things from her gradually over 4 years until there was nothing left to take. She was 61. We had been married for 37 years, and she had been the most organized person I had ever known. After she passed, the house on Hawthorne Street became very quiet in a way it has never entirely stopped being. I have 2 children. My son Patrick lives in Boise and calls every week with the regularity of a man who understands that consistency is its own form of love. My daughter Heidi is 40 years old. She lives in Portland with her husband Craig and their 2 daughters, 9 and 11, who visit the first Saturday of every month and make more noise in an hour than the house hears all week. Since Dorothy's passing, Heidi has been the child who shows up. She helped manage Dorothy's affairs, was at the house twice a week during the hardest years, organized the memorial while working full-time and raising two young daughters. I have never once failed to be grateful for what she gave during that time. What I did not understand until 8 months ago was that efficiency and care are not the same thing, and that gratitude can create a blindness to what is being built in its shadow. I want to tell you about the 3 properties because they are the center of this story, and because their specific nature matters to what happened and why. The first is a 4-story commercial building on N.W. Everett Street in Portland's Pearl District, acquired in 1996, currently valued at approximately $2.8 million. Brooks Architecture occupied the top 2 floors for 14 years. The bottom floors have been continuously leased since 2001. The second is a converted warehouse on S.E. Morrison Street, purchased in 2003 and renovated into mixed-use space with ground-floor retail and creative offices. It won a preservation award in 2006 and has never had a vacancy longer than 6 weeks, currently valued at approximately $1.9 million. The third is a house near Cannon Beach that Dorothy and I bought in 2009. Dorothy designed the garden over 3 summers. 3 of her paintings hang in the living room. I have not rented it, and I have no intention of doing so. It is not an investment. It is a place where Dorothy made things. These 3 properties represent the substantial majority of my net worth. They are all titled in my name. They are all insured in my name. They have been for the entirety of my retirement, the financial foundation on which my life is built. 8 months ago, my daughter Heidi began taking an interest in them that went beyond the kind of filial concern she had always shown. It started the way these things always start, with something small enough to explain away. Heidi came for dinner on a Thursday in late spring. After dinner, she sat at the kitchen table with the particular posture of someone who has come with a purpose they have been waiting to raise. She said, "Dad, I've been thinking about the properties." I said, "What about them?" She said, "You're managing 3 significant assets entirely by yourself. The tenant relationships, the maintenance coordination, the insurance renewals, the accounting, all of it. It's a considerable amount for one person to be carrying." I said I had a property manager, an accountant, and Justin Mercer, who had been my attorney for 15 years. She said, "Would you consider adding me as co-owner of the Morrison Street building? Just a shared title. So if anything happened to you, the property wouldn't be stuck in probate." I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I called Justin. Justin listened. He said, "Brian, what's the current state of your will?" I told him. The properties were to be divided equally between Patrick and Heidi, with the Cannon Beach house going specifically to Heidi because of its emotional significance. Justin said, "Has anything changed recently that might have prompted this conversation?" 3 weeks earlier, Craig had mentioned that his commercial insurance firm had lost a significant account. He had minimized it and moved on quickly. Heidi had helped move the conversation along. I had not thought about it since. I said, "Craig's firm had a difficult quarter." Justin said, "How difficult?" I said I did not know exactly. He said, "Find out." Finding out took 2 weeks. An old colleague, Frank Aldridge, who had worked in commercial real estate finance for 30 years, met me for lunch and told me what he knew. Craig's firm had been losing accounts steadily for 18 months following the departure of 2 senior producers. The business was carrying debt that had begun attracting serious scrutiny at commercial lending institutions. The following Thursday, Heidi came for dinner with Craig and the girls. Craig was warm and attentive. No mention of the firm from either of them. 2 days later, Heidi called with a different framing. A financial advisor had suggested a family-limited partnership structure that would name her and Patrick as managing partners of the 3 properties while I retained beneficial ownership. She said it would simplify management and create estate planning advantages. She emailed the advisor's summary. I read it twice, then sent it to Justin. He called that evening. He said, "Brian, this structure would give Heidi and Patrick authority to encumber all 3 properties as collateral." I said, "Yes." He said, "Craig's firm." I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you want to proceed?" I said, "No, but I need to understand what she's already done." Justin said, "Then let's find out what she's filed." What Justin found. What Justin found over the following 3 weeks I will describe in the order he found it, because the sequence of discoveries mattered to my understanding of how far things had already progressed. The first thing he did was a complete title search on all 3 properties. The N.W. Everett building came back clean. The Morrison Street building came back equally clean. The Cannon Beach house was different. There was a recorded document in the county land records, filed 11 weeks after Dorothy's death, nearly 6 years earlier, that described itself as a beneficial interest declaration. The document named Heidi Brooks Lawson as a 50% beneficial owner of the Cannon Beach property, based on what it described as an oral agreement made between Brian Brooks and Heidi Brooks Lawson at the time of Dorothy Brooks's passing, in which Brian Brooks had agreed to hold the property jointly with Heidi as a memorial to Dorothy's memory. I had made no such agreement. There had been no such conversation. I had been in a hospice room in Southeast Portland 6 years ago, sitting beside my wife as she died, and I had not been discussing property transfers. I had been sitting with my wife. That was all I had been doing. The document had been prepared by an attorney named Richard Calloway. Justin called me that afternoon. He said, "Brian, has Heidi ever mentioned a beneficial interest in the Cannon Beach property?" I said she had not once in 6 years. He said, "She filed this claim 6 weeks after Dorothy passed." I sat in my office looking at Dorothy's garden through the window, everything exactly where she had put it. I thought about every Thursday dinner, every first Saturday with the girls, the way Heidi had held my arm the day Dorothy died, and a document filed 6 weeks later claiming half the house where her mother's paintings hung. I called Justin back. I said, "What else?" He said the family limited partnership structure, had I agreed to it, would have formalized the Cannon Beach claim into managing partner authority over all 3 properties. I said, "She was building a sequence." He said, "Yes. Calloway has filed a notice of intent to pursue formal recognition. She needs your cooperation or a court order." I said, "When is the hearing?" He said, 3 weeks. I said, "What do we need?" He said, "Everything." Justin and I spent 3 weeks preparing. We needed to establish 3 things. First, that no oral agreement had been made at Dorothy's passing. The most important evidence came from Maria Sandoval, Dorothy's primary hospice nurse during her final 3 weeks. Maria had kept contemporaneous daily notes for 30 years of hospice work. Her notes from Dorothy's dying contained no reference to any conversation about property, ownership, or any legal matter. They contained Dorothy's medical records, her pain management, and the conversations she had with family. Near the end, Dorothy had asked Maria to describe the quality of light through the window because her vision was failing. Maria had written this down. No property conversation appeared in 3 weeks of daily notes. Justin had Maria certify everything with a notary. Second, expert analysis of the beneficial interest declaration. Justin engaged 2 experienced Portland real estate attorneys who found the declaration's language and factual predicate legally fragile and factually suspect in ways that Calloway would have understood when he drafted it. Third, the financial timeline. Justin engaged an analyst who documented the precise correspondence between every escalation in Heidi's property-related approaches to me and every deterioration in Craig's firm's financial position. The correlation was exact. Justin assembled everything into a folder in a specific order with a 1-page summary at the front describing in 8 points what each document established. He told me to let him handle the opening and to say nothing until he indicated otherwise. He said the folder would do more work in 4 minutes than anything either of us could say in an hour. The offices were in a building in the Pearl District on a block I had designed the massing study for in 1991. I noticed this and did not mention it. The conference room was on the 3rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a long walnut table, 8 chairs. The kind of room designed to convey the seriousness of the work done in it, which is a legitimate design goal and one I had served myself on several occasions. Richard Calloway was already at the table when Justin and I were shown in, trim, silver-haired, composed, yellow legal pad, 2 manila folders. His associate Chen sat to his right with a laptop. Heidi was seated to Calloway's left, in the blue jacket she wore to situations that required professional dress. She looked at me when I came through the door. For a moment I saw something in her face that I recognized from her childhood, a particular expression she had worn when she had done something she was entirely convinced was right and also knew had hurt someone she loved. Then she looked at the table. I sat down across from her. Justin sat beside me. He placed his briefcase on the table and did not open it. Calloway said, "Good morning. I think we all agree that a negotiated resolution serves everyone's interests better than formal proceedings." Justin said, "Before we discuss resolution, I'd like to understand the evidentiary basis for the claim." Calloway described the verbal understanding at Dorothy's passing. Justin asked about witnesses. Calloway said oral agreements didn't require them. Justin said they required parties who both made them. Calloway shifted slightly. He said, "My recollection of a conversation 6 years ago during an extremely difficult period might not be fully reliable." I said nothing. He said, "Mr. Brooks, with respect, you have no legal standing in this matter to contest what is documented in the declaration. The filing is on record. The agreement it describes was made. And with or without your cooperation, Miss Brooks Lawson is entitled to have her interest formally recognized." That sentence, "You have no legal standing in this matter." I looked at Calloway. I looked at my daughter. I looked at Justin. Justin opened his briefcase. He removed the folder. He placed it on the table. He opened it with the same deliberate, unhurried motion I had watched him use in offices and courtrooms for 15 years. He slid the first document across the table to Richard Calloway. The document was Maria Sandoval's certified contemporaneous notes. 30 years of careful documentation. 3 weeks of daily entries. No property conversation. No mention of any transfer or joint ownership of any kind. Calloway set it down. His expression had shifted slightly. An experienced attorney does not let dramatic shifts show, but the recalibration was visible if you knew what you were looking at. And I had spent 30 years reading drawings in which the most important information was in the small adjustments. Justin slid the second document. The forensic analysis of the declaration, the language inconsistencies, the professional opinions from 2 Portland practitioners on its credibility and litigation prospects. Calloway read this one more slowly. Chen had stopped typing. The third document was the financial timeline, Craig's firm's exposure, the account losses and their dates, the precise correspondence to the dates of Heidi's approaches to me. Calloway read the first page of the third document and set it down before finishing it. The fourth document was the title history, showing no encumbrance had been recorded prior to the filing 11 weeks after Dorothy's death. The fifth document was the professional letter from 2 real estate attorneys stating the declaration would not survive evidentiary challenge. Calloway set down the fifth document. The room was completely quiet. He looked at Chen, who was not typing. He looked at Heidi, who had been reading each document as Justin slid it across, and whose face had moved through a sequence of changes I watched without comment. Calloway said, "I think we should take a short recess." Justin said, "Of course." Heidi stood up. She moved toward the door and stopped. She turned around. She said, "Dad." I said, "I know." She said, "Craig's firm." I said, "I know about Craig's firm." She said, "I wasn't trying to steal it. I was trying to save it. The house. Mom's house. If Craig's firm goes under, creditors come after everything we have. I thought if I had a documented ownership interest, I could protect it, keep it out of reach." She looked at the documents spread across the table. I said, "You thought you'd protect your mother's house by building a legal claim based on a conversation that never happened." She said nothing. I said, You filed that document 6 weeks after your mother died. You were at that hospice every day. And 6 weeks after she was gone, you filed a document claiming she had agreed to give you half of the house where she made her paintings. Heidi said, I was scared. Craig's problems were worse than I'd told you. The house was the one thing that felt like it could be safe. I said, you could have come to me. She said, you would have said no to using it as collateral. I said yes. I would have said no to that. And I would have said yes to finding another way. A way that didn't involve building a legal fiction about a conversation your mother and I never had. She said, I didn't think there was another way. I said, that's what you thought, but you didn't ask. Calloway came back into the room. He said, we'd like to discuss a withdrawal of the beneficial interest claim. Justin said, we're listening. The withdrawal was filed 12 days later without comment. The county records were updated. The Cannon Beach property was clean. Craig's firm restructured over the following 4 months. 2 more producers left. Margins were renegotiated lower, but the firm survived. Justin introduced Craig to a commercial lending contact who helped renegotiate the primary debt obligation without requiring additional collateral. This was the conversation that could have happened months earlier. I do not dwell on that. Heidi and I had 3 conversations before the withdrawal was filed. The third was where we said what needed to be said. I told her that after Dorothy died, I had spent 3 days alone at Cannon Beach and understood for the first time what it meant to hold something together when the person who always held it together was gone. I told her I had been afraid of failing to protect what Dorothy had made. Heidi said, that's the same fear I had. I said, I know. But fear doesn't justify the method. You built something on a lie about your mother. That's not protection, that's use. She said, I've known that since before I filed it. I told myself I would explain it to you someday, but I never could find the moment. I said, there are some moments you have to make. She said, I know that now. I said, we're going to have to rebuild something here. That takes time and honesty you've been withholding for 6 years. She said, I can do that. She cried then, for the first time in all of this, and after a while we talked about Dorothy and the house and what it meant to both of us. The conversation we should have been having for 6 years. I am 68 years old. I have spent 30 years reading documents that contain both what a building is supposed to be and what it actually is. I have spent those years building things that required understanding the difference between what a structure looks like from the outside and what is holding it up on the inside. Those 2 skills are the same skill applied to different materials. What I saw in that conference room was a structure built on a false foundation, the beneficial interest claim, the family limited partnership proposal, the escalating approaches over 8 months, each piece carefully made, each piece serving a purpose, the structure coherent. What it was not was true, and a structure built on something that is not true does not fail gradually. It fails when the one thing it was built around is removed. Justin removed it with 5 documents in 4 minutes. I want to say something about Heidi that I would not want this story to obscure. She is not a bad person. She did a thing that was wrong, and she knew it was wrong when she did it, and she has spent 6 years carrying that knowledge alongside her love for me and her grief for her mother and her fear about Craig. I do not know how heavy that has been. I suspect it has been heavy. What she did came from fear, from watching Craig's firm deteriorate and feeling the ground shifting under everything they had built. The fear was real. The method was wrong. But I have learned in 30 years of building things that understanding why a structure failed is more useful than simply condemning it. You understand the failure, so you can build something better. What she needed was not what she tried to construct from the county records. What she needed was the conversation we finally had. The folder gave her the context in which she finally could have it. The first Saturday of every month, she still brings the girls. Last month, the older one asked if she could see the paintings at Cannon Beach sometime. I said yes. I meant it completely. Justin's note is on my desk. It says, "Well handled." I keep it because it reminds me what handling something well actually means. Sitting in a room where someone tells you that you have no standing and not raising your voice. Letting the documentation speak. Understanding that the most powerful thing you can bring to a difficult moment is preparation, not emotion. My father used to say that the most important skill in reading a technical drawing was patience, the willingness to follow each line to where it actually led rather than where you assumed it was going. Most costly errors came from people who read drawings the way they wanted them to read. I followed the lines, into the county records, into the financial history, into the conversation I should have been having with my daughter for 6 years. The folder is in my filing cabinet. I have not opened it since that Wednesday. I know what it contains. The Cannon Beach house is still mine. Dorothy's garden is in its 4th spring. The wisteria came back strong this year. The paintings are still in the living room. I am not going anywhere. If you are a person whose child has hurt you by trying, in their own flawed and frightened way, to protect something they love, I want you to hear this clearly. Love and honesty are not opposites. You can hold someone accountable while also understanding why they did it. You can require the truth while being willing to hear it when it finally arrives. You can say, "This is what happened and this is what it cost, and we are going to have to talk about all of it," and mean it as the beginning of something rather than the end. The folder was necessary. The conversation after it was more necessary still. Tell me in the comments, has someone close to you ever done something wrong in the name of something they loved? Has someone you trusted tried to protect something by taking it without asking? I want to hear from you.